Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. Today I'm sharing with you a really easy bread machine recipe. This is leftover rice bread. This is just a cheap, frugal, simple bread to make, and it's great when you have about a cup of leftover rice and it's just gonna go in the trash. I hate wasting anything, even if it's cheap rice. So this is a great recipe for no waste. Let's just get started on this super easy bread machine recipe. I'm gonna start with 3/4 of a cup of warm water. You want this to be about 100 to 110 degrees. I'm just gonna throw that right on into my bread machine loaf pan. I'm using my Zojirushi Home Bakery Supreme. I love this bread machine. It has the double paddles inside. Love it. Needs everything up really well. Okay, to that water, I'm gonna add some oil. I'm gonna use a tablespoon of this olive oil, but you can use any kind of oil that you want. You can use a tablespoon of butter if you'd rather do that, but I'm gonna use this olive oil. Coconut oil works really well, sunflower oil. Those are the two I mainly use, but I really like it with this olive oil. So anything you wanna use, 1 tablespoon right on into your bread machine loaf pan. And next I'm gonna use 1 egg. An egg acts as an enricher to your bread and just makes the texture really nice. But if you're trying to be really cheap and frugal, you can leave out the egg and add about a tablespoon or 2 more water. That'll work just fine too. And next we want our rice. This is 1 cup of white rice, but you can get away with using brown rice. You can also get away with using a little bit less or a little bit more, just depending on how much you have that you want to use up. This is a very forgiving recipe in the amount of rice that you use. But this is just long grain white rice. Nothing special, nothing fancy. This is what I keep in my food storage in big 5-gallon buckets. And I always have some left over after a meal. So this is a great recipe for times like this. So I'm gonna just add that cup of rice right on into my bread machine loaf pan. And now we want some sugar. I'm gonna use just 1 teaspoon of this white sugar. You can get away with not using any sugar in this recipe if you want. It does help our yeast a little bit, but if you don't want to use any sugar, it's fine. Or you can use some honey, some maple syrup, any kind of sweetener that you want. But this little tiny bit of sweetener isn't going to make this bread sweet at all. And now it's time for some flour. I'm going to use 3 cups of bread flour. You can also use all-purpose flour just fine in this recipe. Or you can even use fresh milled flour or whole wheat flour. It works great in this recipe. So 3 cups right on into your loaf pan. I like to store my flour in these big 5-gallon buckets because I buy my flour in big 25-pound bags, and 1 25-pound bag fits perfectly in this 5-gallon bucket. And then I put these really cool gamma lids on top, and they just twist on, and it just keeps my flour nice and fresh and from anything getting into my flour. So this is a great way, and it just stores right at the bottom of my pantry. That's how I like to store my flour. And now you're gonna want some salt. I like this Redmond's Real Salt. This is what I use in all of my baking, and I really like it. It's an ancient fine sea salt, but you can use any kind of salt that you want. I'm gonna use 1 teaspoon of this salt. Like I always say, definitely don't pour it over your loaf pan with all of your other ingredients, or you might over pour it and get really salty bread. So just add that right on into your loaf pan, right on top of your flour. And our very last ingredient is the yeast. This is my Saft Instant yeast, and I have it stored in this freezer bag because I store my yeast in the freezer. And when you do that, it just lasts forever that way. It'll last and last and last for years past the expiration date. So I want 2 teaspoons of yeast, and I'm just gonna throw it right on into my loaf pan. If you want to, you can put the salt on one side, the yeast on another side, but we're gonna get this going right now, and so it really doesn't matter if your salt and your yeast touch or interact. Okay, those are all of our ingredients for our leftover rice bread. Now I'm gonna go ahead and throw this into my bread machine. This is my dirty old bread machine that has made countless loaves of bread for me. I love this thing, but it is a little bit dirty. Sorry about that. Now I'm gonna go ahead, I like to choose a light crust. I always like a light crust. And I am just going to press start on a basic white bread. I'm gonna press start, and in about 3 hours, this bread is gonna be ready for us. But in about 5 minutes, I'm gonna check on my ball of dough. and I can see if it needs a little bit more flour, a little bit more water. It's really important to always check on your ball of dough. Even if you use exact measurements, weather, humidity, climate, everything is going to affect how much flour or how much water your ball of dough needs. And so that's really the most important part of making bread using your bread machine or a mixer. So I'll show you exactly what this dough should look like in about 5 minutes. I forgot to mention, I'm making a 1.5 pound loaf of this leftover rice bread, but I'll also leave you the recipes for a 1 pound loaf and a 2 pound loaf. Down in the description, there's going to be a link to the printable recipe, and I'll also leave the recipe in grams. It's been about 7 minutes, and I'm just checking on my ball of dough. I like to come in with a rubber spatula and kind of get any of those ingredients that might be stuck to the sides. I like to get those incorporated into my ball of dough. If you've ever seen a bread machine bread baked with a little bit of white stuff on the outside of it, that's just because it had some flour that was stuck to the loaf pan. So definitely get that flour off. Now this one's looking really good. It's not too wet. If it was, it would be sticking to the paddles and to the sides and to the bottom. So I don't need to add any flour, and it's looking pretty good. It's tacky, it's not too sticky. I do like it to come together in a little bit smoother ball of dough. So I could add about a tablespoon of water or milk and let it incorporate in, but I think it's gonna be just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and close my bread machine, and in a few hours, I'm gonna have a delicious loaf of leftover rice bread. Our leftover rice bread is done. Look at this gorgeous loaf of bread. Let's go ahead and get it out of the loaf pan. Now, I chose a light crust, but it is rather light. If you want yours darker than mine, go ahead and choose a medium or a dark crust, but this looks great to me. It's nice and soft. What you do to your bread after it's done baking is just as important as the recipe that you use. If you leave it in the loaf pan to cool, it can get really soggy. And if you leave it on the countertop, just on a rack, it can go stale and get really dried out really quickly. So what I like to do is I like to turn it out of the loaf pan immediately. I like to brush it with some melted butter, and then I like to cover it up with a tea towel. And all that warmth and the condensation will give you just a really nice soft crust. And that butter will make it taste so good and look so pretty. And then it's also really important to let your bread cool off a little bit before you slice into it. If you slice into it when it's hot, it can be a little bit gummy and not slice very well. But it is really hard to resist a nice hot slice of bread. But if you let it cool off a little bit until it's warm, then it's gonna slice a lot better, and it's gonna be a lot better texture, a lot better crumb. So I've let this one cool off for a little bit, probably about 30 minutes, and now I'm slicing into it, and look how good this looks. It is a fantastic texture, it's nice and soft, and you really can't even tell that there's rice in this bread. You can tell on the outside it has some of those darker specks, that's the rice, but when you look inside of it, you really can't tell. This is a very savory bread. There's no sweetness at all, so it's a great sandwich bread. Rice is an unusual ingredient, but this leftover rice bread is moist and it definitely has an interesting texture. So if you have some leftover rice, don't let it go to waste. Make this leftover rice bread. It's a fun bread to make using your bread machine. I'm gonna store my leftover rice bread in one of my beeswax bread bags. My daughters and I make these together from start to finish. We measure, cut, sew, infuse with organic beeswax, and we have so much fun doing this together. I'll leave the link for these plus the printable recipe down in the description. Thanks so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I'll see you next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each need,